In 1972, there wasn't a film that powerhoused its way through theatres like the movie Deliverance. It's based on James Dickey's novel, and it was adapted for the screen by the writer himself. The story follows four friends, Burt Reynolds, John Voight, Ned Beatty, and Ronnie Cox, who go on a canoeing trip together in the Georgia wilderness, only to come into an absolute terrifying conflict with some inbred locals. This show taps into some very primal fears: man versus nature, town versus country, and perhaps the most memorable of those is where it preys on the masculinity of the characters due to the film's unforgettable sequence that happens to Ned Beatty in the woods. It remains really shocking stuff when you watch it today, and you can only imagine the effect it had on moviegoers when it came out in July of 1972. Despite the really grim nature of this drama, this movie was a huge hit, winning 3 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture and Directing, and making Burt Reynolds an absolute star. It rescued John Voight's career, and it introduced theatre actors Beatty and Cox to the public, and it also turned the director, John Boorman, into an A-list director. And one of the most famous scenes in the movie is the dueling banjos scene. This was shot very first thing. This is the first setup that they did for the movie. Then the rest of the movie was shot almost exclusively in sequence. According to the director, the gas station attendant's jig that he dances during the dueling banjos time on the screen was unscripted and completely spontaneous. Now, the boy that plays the banjo is named Billy Redden, and there were some funny things about him. He really liked Ronnie Cox, but he absolutely hated Ned Beatty. At the end of the dueling banjo scene, the script called for Billy to harden his expression towards Cox's character. But Billy just couldn't do this. He didn't want to hate Cox. To solve the problem, they got Ned Beatty to step forward towards Billy at the close of the shot. As Beatty approached him, Billy hardened off his expression and looked the way they wanted him to on camera. Doodling Banjos, the song, won a Grammy Award for Best Original Song, but it was written back in 1955 by Arthur Smith. And this song had been used in October of 1963 on an episode of The Andy Griffith Show. Now, there's been a rumour for years and years about the scene of the banjo player. And that is that there is really a true banjo player that performed the fretting from behind the actor Billy Redden. But this has kind of been disproven because any of the real banjo players that are used to picking this instrument say that the screenshots of this isn't remotely realistic of what somebody would be doing when they were playing this song. I don't know what the real truth in this is. I just know it's a great scene and that Billy Redden didn't play the banjo, so they ended up making it look like he was playing it, but I'm not really sure how it was done. I said that Burt Reynolds preferred to move really quickly through every scene that they were shooting. John Voight challenged almost every decision and needed an explanation for why things were done. And this made things just drag out. Voight would also require 3 minutes before shooting scenes that he's supposed to be exhausted in because he would run around in an area to tire himself out and really would be exhausted when he shot the scenes. Burt Reynolds, in contrast, would just spritz himself in the face to simulate sweat and then breathe really hard for the camera. The director found that these two guys were great influences on each other's acting abilities. John Voight had just played a male gigolo who was treated as a sex object and victimized by the big city and midnight cowboy. In some ways, this is the flip side of that same story. Instead of there being a hayseed that goes to New York and being used and victimized by city slickers, in this story, there's a businessman from Atlanta going into the country and being abused by rednecks. It's basically the same fish out of water story. That makes an intriguing movie. Warner Brothers initially told the director that he could only make the film if he found 2 named stars to headline in it. He did just that. At which point, the studio said that the movie was now going to cost too much because of these stars. They then decided to produce the film on a really tight budget, and the director went out and scoured the country and found Ned Beatty and Ronnie Cox to fill their roles in the movie. They destroyed over 5 canoes over the course of the production. Burt Reynolds and Ned Beatty did really well canoeing for the most part, but Voight and Cox made a lot more mistakes, and they said that the worst experience was when Ned Beatty went under and was stuck for nearly a minute. People thought he was going to drown. The director asked him how he felt when he was trapped and couldn't get out of the water. And Beatty replied to him that his first concern was whether or not they were going to be able to finish the film without him. They used virtually no stunt doubles in this movie. The director said he just didn't like stuntmen. He'd rather use the actors themselves. He felt that if a shot was too dangerous, that you needed a stuntman, that you shouldn't be doing that shot. Now, he did acknowledge that there were some exceptions to this rule, including one instance where Voight was doubled by a stuntman in a certain scene. But, in general, he preferred to do the scenes with actual actors. He also doesn't typically use second-unit directors, and that's partly due to his desire to be involved in all of the film's production. Every image that's shot needs to have the same kind of integrity and the same kind of style throughout. The studio had the production shoot alternate takes for later television broadcasts that included softer language. The famous line, "Squeal like a pig," was originally crafted as one of those alternate changes from a harsher line. But the director, after watching the dailies, realised that this was much more powerful than the vulgar option that they originally had started with. Now that scene where Ned Beatty gets molested by the hillbilly was done in one take. And this was all done because Ned Beatty didn't want to experience the thing twice. He wanted it done on the initial shooting of that scene. It's said that Ned Beatty came up with the line about the pig and mentioned it during production, and they liked it and tried it and stuck with it. Burt Reynolds got injured during the filming of the movie, and what he did was break his tailbone when he was going down the rapids. This all happened when the canoe capsized. Originally, a cloth dummy was used, but it looked too fake. It looked like a dummy going over the waterfall. To save cost in the production and to add to the realism of the film, they used a lot of local residents. They were all cast as the hill people. Another thing that they tightened their purse strings on was the production wasn't insured. Something that just doesn't happen. And this is kind of crazy thinking that the actors did their own stunts. Now, one problem they ran into after they shot the film was that the river just looked really too pretty for the type movie that it was. So they had to, in post-production, go in and desaturate the colours to make it less appealing. Now the writer of the book, James Dickey, had a strange habit that he used while he was on this production. He would only address the actors by calling them their character names. He wouldn't call them their real names. Everybody on the set thought this was just terribly strange. During the filming of the canoe scene, he showed up completely inebriated, and he got into a bitter argument with John Boorman, the director, who had rewritten some of the original script. They had a brief fistfight in which Boorman's nose ended up getting broken, and it said that he lost some teeth in the altercation. They threw James Dickey off the set, but they didn't file any charges against him. I find that amazing. They probably did that because the studio didn't want the publicity associated with that. But it's kind of crazy. These two ended up reconciling and they became good friends in the long haul. The director actually gave Dickey a cameo role as the sheriff at the end of the film. When John Boorman was looking for an actor to play the toothless hillbilly, Burt Reynolds is the one that suggested Herbert Coward, also known as Cowboy. He knew that he had no front teeth and was basically illiterate, and that he stuttered too. Reynolds had previously worked with him in a Wild West show in Maggie Valley, North Carolina. Now, the movie never does explain the title, but what the book states that what the city boys are trying to find in the backwoods is deliverance from the stress of modern life. Burt Reynolds called this one of the best movies that he was ever in. And I have a tendency to agree. This is a fun watch. Take a look at it again. If you've never seen this, you're in for a real treat. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll continue to chase the classics.